Okay, so I've got my massing model starting to come together, and so I want to start putting some more detailed geometry in there, and I'm going to go back to another 3D view that I have, and sorry, that's not the one. This is the one. So I've got there a view with the walls hidden, and I'm just going to hide this this door as well, just so you can see then the massing there with some of the other geometry that I've modelled. And so remember, you can toggle the massing on and off at any time to see just the physical geometry. And it's good to think about that, because these are things that are going to be built, whereas the massing is just a conceptual model. And so I just wanted to show you some of the options you have for converting the massing into physical geometry. And so on the massing and site tab, you have these different options for making floors, walls, roofs and curtain systems. And the common mistake I think people make is using curtain systems to create a curtain wall when they've got a flat surface. And so here you can see with the curtain system option, I can pick that. And over in the properties panel, I've got just two different curtain systems there. Oops. And if I go to edit type, you can see you've got similar options to what you have when you're making a regular curtain wall. But curtain systems are very different to regular curtain walls. So decide whether you need to use them. I generally think you only need to use them if you've got unusual geometry. And if you don't, if it's just a flat surface like this, it's much, much easier to use the regular wall tool, which you can get to either by choosing the wall button on the architecture tab, or if you go to massing and site, choosing the wall tool there, it does the same thing. All that's doing is setting the option here to pick face. You can always go back to drawing lines if you want to. So it's just the regular wall tool. And there you can see that you have all the different options for walls, and you have curtain walls there. So again, I always recommend that when you don't know the framing system you want, start with the simplest. So if you use storefront, I'll just show you. If I pick that surface, notice this is a common thing people think won't work, but it's actually fine if the surface is flat and vertical. So I can make a storefront curtain wall out of that surface, and then if I select it, you can see then I've got the option there, update to face, which means if I change the mass, then I can have that surface or that curtain wall change to follow that that mass. So I'm going to maybe just do a quick change to that. So if I find the void there it is, and I'll adjust it slightly. It's a bit tricky here, so I'm going to try going to X-ray mode and see if that makes it a bit easier to get the surface I want. So there we are. So I've got a face there, which I'll just stretch a little bit. Okay, so I've finished the mass, and then if I go back into the 3D view, I can select that curtain wall and then update to face, and it's going to follow it. But you can see there that storefront curtain wall has these predefined mullions in a predefined pattern. And the mullions, I've got to say, are a bit ugly. They're a bit too chunky, probably, for the sort of work you might want to do, where you might want something a bit more refined. And maybe the pattern isn't what you want either. And so to change that, you may want to go back to the plain glass and then put in your own pattern. But if you do that, if I go back to curtain wall 6mm thick glazing, firstly it's going to give me a message telling me that the grid lines are not present in the new curtain wall. So I've got the option of either deleting the grid lines that have been defined here, or by clicking OK, it'll keep those grid lines, but they won't be associated with the pattern anymore. So in this case, I'm going to choose delete grid lines. But then you'll see, having done that, I'm left with these mullions going around the border. So I'll delete that, and instead, if I'd just gone and made the curtain wall using that 6mm thick glazing type in the first place, I wouldn't have had those extra things. So it would have been a bit simpler, and so then I can easily isolate this. I can also, you can see there to show you a couple of the options that you have. If this was made as a curtain system, I wouldn't have the option to edit profile or to attach, which I get because it's a regular wall. So in this case I can go attach top base, and I can choose the floor there, for example, so that it stops underneath that floor. Okay, so again, that's usually why I recommend, if you can, using the regular wall tool to make curtain walls, and only use curtain systems where you have to. Because again, curtain systems always are going to follow the face that you've defined, or the surface you've defined with your massing, and that just creates extra work for you.
Are you saying that curtain wall you've just done doesn't show the frame?
No, it's just a plain sheet of glass. And so that's a good way. If you need to do even just plain glass, curtain walls are pretty good. Sometimes there's a better way, which is just to use a normal wall and set the material to glass and make it thin, because it'll give you a nicer join. But it's less accurate. So this is, a curtain wall is going to give you glass that's modelled more like glass would be in real life, because they're individual sheets. And so if you're after realism, then it's a great thing to try. And so you can see then it's set out from the edge of the surface deliberately, because to begin with, the glass panels are set up for that mullion type. So maybe I will just set it back to storefront, so you can see it in plan. I'm going to undo this in a second, but this will probably make it clearer if you've ever wondered why the curtain walls don't join properly at a corner. Okay, so I'll put it back to the plain one, and I'll make another surface into a curtain wall. So I'm just going to pick this one here as well. Okay, so that again should be just plain glass initially, and I'll again attach that to the floor. So looking at that in plan now, you can see that they don't appear to join properly. Now, if I change them both to storefront, it'll make it maybe a bit clearer why they join in that way. So if I go to storefront, you'll see then, it's a bit hard to see with the massing, so I'm going to hide my massing. So you can see then, firstly, when you see the glass next to a regular mullion, then it can make sense, or can make it clearer why the glass is set out from the centre line, because it's set up to work with this deep 150mm mullion, and it's set to go closer to the outside than the inside, which is the way you normally have glass in a window, so that it's easier to waterproof. And that's why the glass is set to go to one side of that that centre there by about 30-something mil. If you work it out, the glass panel is 25mm, and then it's offset 37mm, which is basically measured from the centre line there, and it's to the centre of this, which is rounded off to be 12, so it's whatever the gap is from there back to the centre is so it's 24.5mm. Alright, so to change that, you can just go back to the offset property in the panel and set that to 0, and then you can see the glass centred within the wall. But I'm going to undo all of that and go back to having the plain glass panels. And then, firstly, again, just use Tab to select one of those panels, and then you can see it's system panel glaze. So if I go to Edit Type now, and then set the offset to 0, and I might also change the thickness to a bit less, maybe 20 mil. That's going to change all of my glass. And so now the wall hasn't moved, but the panel isn't set out from the centre line anymore. So they're connecting at the corner. And if you just want plain sheets of glass, that's often all you need. You're always going to have that join. They'll never join with a corner the way you get the joins with a regular wall. But that's pretty close to the way a two sheets of glass would be joined, even though they'd probably be more like, well, if we disallow the join, they'd be more like this. And then you'd have some sort of, silicon or some sort of joining material between them. You don't need to show that though. So the level of detail is going to determine what you need to show, and on a 1 to 100 drawing, you're not going to see that join clearly anyway, as long as they don't have a gap at the corner. That's often good enough. And so then going back to my view there, then just have a quick look at the options you have for grids and putting in the other options with curtain walls. So starting with this simple pattern, if I go to Edit Type and then Duplicate, and I can put in a spacing here, so I might make this 2400. Oh, that's fine. Yep, no worries. So just 2400 wide. So all I want is vertical panels. And so there I can put in a vertical spacing and make the maximum spacing there 2400. And normally it should let you click apply there. When it doesn't, you might need to just click OK, and then you can see the grid. And the way I usually recommend building up your curtain wall settings is to start with the grid, get that right first, and then try and put the mullions and the panels in afterwards. Otherwise, it'll end up giving you messages telling you it's got to delete mullions and other things as you change these options. If you've ever wondered about doing angled mullions, there is an option, just if you're interested. So if you click on that configure grid layout button there, then you can change the angle of the two grids. So I could make this 25 degrees or something, if you want sloping mullions. So, yeah, you can do, yep. If you want to. I mean, it's difficult to build those, but with exterior shelves, it can be really interesting. And so something like that Macquarie Bank building. What's it? The address? Yeah. So you could do that easily with a curtain wall. So when you select the wall, you'll get this configure grid layout button in the middle, and then you can change the angle there. So I'll try, say, negative this time. So negative. Yeah, down in that new precinct next to Barangaroo. Well, I think it's kind of part of Barangaroo, but yeah. I should know the name of it. I've written a few reports on it, but yeah, just forgotten the address. 1 Myrtle Street, maybe? No, anyhow, somewhere like down there. Yep. So if you want grid lines that aren't parallel though, then you need to use a different technique. This will only give you parallel grid lines, and so there's a different approach. If you want grids that aren't parallel, there is a way, but it's a bit more complicated than this, and I won't show you that because you need to do assemblies essentially. So we'll look at that later. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So I might think, well, okay, that spacing is a little bit large, so I can go back to Edit Type now and so I'll try 1800, which is a more realistic size of glass anyway.
So is this because you have to have, there's a maximum limit of sheets of glass, like
Yeah.
size-wise?
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Before you put them on
Yeah, you want to work that out first, yeah.
I can't just have one massive long wall with no Mullions.
No. So I have a look at the Apple building in town. That's got basically the biggest sheets of glass you can get. 16 metre long for a single panel. Oh, maybe in one direction, but it couldn't be in both directions. So, yeah. Right. Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah, that'd be interesting. You wonder how they could possibly transport it because you can't get trucks that big usually. So, yeah, interesting. Yeah.
There's been some beautiful houses that you've seen where they've done these massive, big doors or walls.
Yeah,
that
yeah.
are just one frame.
Yeah.
They're quite, yeah.
Yeah, so they might be 3 or 4 metres in one direction, and then the other direction. Yeah, you can't do much more than maybe 2 metres the other way. But I mean, you've got to think about transport. How are you going to get it there? And then, and there is a limit with the span as well. So if it's got that length, it can only go so far the other direction without having some sort of reinforcing. Yeah. So. Yeah. But here now, I can choose this other wall and set it to the same type, and it's probably going to be less than 1800 because that's the maximum span, and or the maximum width. This wall's only, 2.75 wide, so it's just going to divide that in two. And so you can have a look at those options and see whether they work for your grid. And then if you go back and edit the type again, you can add mullions afterwards. So we can set the border mullion, I'll just do the interior mullions to begin with. And so because I've set this to I'll have the panels set to the centre, I can use this 30mm square. So normally if you use the 50 by 150, it'll work with anything, but the 30mm square wouldn't have worked with the panel the way it was set up before. So I've just set it now, and I'll show you what I mean. So if we go back and have a look in the plan. Okay, so this is too difficult to see. If I go to 1 to 50, you can see it because the glass is centred, it works pretty well. But if the glass was the way it was, with the offset at 37, the glass would have been outside the mullion, which is no good. So you just need to think about how the glass and the mullion, or the panel and the mullion, are going to work together. And so because I'm using such narrow mullions, I can maybe make the glass even narrower, just so it reads a bit better. And then what I also want to do is make a better mullion. So I'm going to select the mullion, and you'll see you can set any shape you like, so they don't have to be rectangles. And so if you want to do your own mullion shapes, have a look at making profiles, and you can draw any shape you like, which can be interesting. But I'm just going to stick with rectangular. So if I go to edit type, you'll see this is a rectangular mullion, but it's greyed out. That's because it's type driven. So to edit it, I just need to go to the pin icon, unpin it, and now if I go to edit type, I can change it. So notice how, even though it was square, the family is still rectangular mullion. And so I'm going to duplicate that and make it 80, I don't know, maybe 70 by 25. Okay, so to make that dimension, I just need to put the first one in there, 70 for the for the thickness, but then for the width, it's done either side of the centre line. So you need to put half the width for each of those options there. So it's going to be 12.5 for both width values, and that'll make it 25. So now if I click OK, you can see I've got a much nicer rectangular mullion. Okay, but notice it's only this mullion that's changed. So now I need to go back and select the wall, and then go to Edit Type, and then change the interior type there to the one that I made, 70 by 25. Yeah, and then I'll do all of them. So notice it's done all interior mullions. You've got an option for the borders as well. But I often find that for the vertical option, for the vertical mullions, there isn't a lot of good reason to put in the border types every time. And the reason is that you'll have to go and do the corners manually anyway. So notice how at the corner, if we put in that mullion, and remember you can always put in a mullion manually just by going to the mullion tool on the architecture tab, and I'll choose the one I've just made. So if you look at that in plan, it's not going to work. It doesn't join properly. And that's really the reason that people at first really struggle with curtain walls, because these corner joins don't look right. And the reason is that you need to use a different mullion for those. And so you can set them in properties, but for the corners I find it's usually easy just to go and manually place those mullions. So I've placed a rectangular mullion, but you'll see in properties that as well as the rectangular mullions, you have these different corner mullions. So you've essentially got a few different predefined mullion types. You've got circular mullions and rectangular mullions, mainly for the intermediate mullions in between your panels. And then you've got corner mullions, and I suppose circular mullions as well work pretty well for corners. But then these other corner mullions are set up just for corners. So if I go to the quad mullion, you can see that's going to give me a joint. It's a bit too large, but it's joining much better than the rectangular mullion would have. So I can simply make my own version of that as well. So I've got this that is 70 by 25. So if I go and select my quad mullion, Edit Type, Duplicate, and we'll make this 75 by 75 quad. Oops. And then just change the properties down here to 75 in each direction, depth 1 and 2. And that then will match up pretty well with my other mullions. For the end mullions, you can then set probably the one you've used for the intermediate. And this is why, like I was saying, it doesn't really help you that much to put the border mullions in for vertical mullions, because in some cases you're going to have corner mullions, in other instances you're going to have just the mullion you've used for the interior. So for the ends, basically, you find, I find anyway, you just need to go and pick those manually, and it doesn't take long to do that. Now for the horizontal mullions, you might find that you don't need to define those at all. It depends. So here I've got these panels, and I might want full height glass for some of these. If I decide that I want to have a transom, in other words, a horizontal piece going all the way through at my door head height, I could put that in, and I'll just do that for the sake of it so you can see. If I go and put in a horizontal grid option now, so I'll make that fixed distance, and I'll make it 2100. So now I've got a horizontal grid that runs through all of those panels. And then I could go and put in a mullion for the interior type, the same as the others. But I'm going to leave the borders because I probably don't need to see a mullion running along the floor. If I'm building this with negative detailing or trying to have simple details where possible, I'd recess that into the floor. So you wouldn't need to see that bottom plate. And the same at the top. You maybe try to have the top plate concealed as well. So that's an option. But if I go back, another maybe simpler option, if you just want to put a door in, you can put your own grids in. So with the curtain grid tool, actually you realise that what I've been showing you so far, what I've been showing you so far is setting grid options in the wall type. But you of course have the curtain grid tool there, which will let you draw your own curtain grids anywhere you want. And so if I just want to put a door into this curtain wall, you've got there these options for placing curtain grids. You can either go to all segments, one segment, or all except picked. So with all segments, it's just going to place a grid all the way along. I can change the spacing there. So that works pretty well. But then I might not want the grid to go all the way. So I can select that grid line and then go add remove segments and then remove any parts there just by clicking on them. Okay, so now, I'll just get this one too. So now I've just got the one grid line segment in between these two mullions here. But there's a much quicker way. I'll just delete that grid line and do a curtain grid again. If you go to one segment, it'll just let you pick in between any two grid lines. So that way I can then put a mullion just in that section. And now, so we've had a look at the curtain wall itself, we've had a look at grids, we've had a look at mullions, and now if I use tab, I can select the glass panel. If I go to edit type there, you can see that we've got a few different options and also the load button. Now, let me know, there's a bit of a bug with 2016. Sometimes that load button won't come up. So if it doesn't, just cancel, go to insert and then load family and then go to curtain panels and load in any curtain wall panel, doesn't matter which one. And I think I've shown you this before, but just make sure that's a really common error you'll get. So that load button should work, it's just a bug from 2016. So again, back to edit type, and now I can go to load, curtain wall panels, and we're just going to double click on one of these curtain wall doors. Okay, and we've got a door. Now, if I go back into plan, you'll see it looks like a regular door, but it's also offset from the centre, just like the glass was initially. So just like the glass, I can go to edit type and then change that offset value. So I might make that, well, I don't want it to be 0 because you couldn't have the glass door hinge in the centre. It would need to be on the corner, but I can make it less. So maybe I'll make it 30 and that'll bring it back just a bit, and that's, it's not quite on the corner, but that's close enough. So I can flip it to open the other way, and then back in my 3D view we can see that's touching the glass and doesn't have any gaps. So there are lots of options for panels. Did we ever do the Bakshi space? No, okay, so you might have missed that one. The Andrew Boy Charlton Pool, you never did that one?
Did that one.
Oh, you did, okay,
Yeah,
so...
we did glass, we just put it
Oh,
on.
yeah, good, okay. So you might remember the louvers.
Yeah.
Yep, so here, if I select this, if you have a look in the library at the moment, it's only got the glass louvers, which aren't even set up properly. They work, but here we are. But there are some issues. It's not going to go full height, and you can't adjust the angle very easily. So I'll dig out the other ones that I made, which will give you a few more options if you want to try doing some louvered panels. But you can make whatever pattern you like. So you can make cross patterns. I've seen people do in some of the other courses, perforated panels, and you know, lots of different things you can try with the panel design there. So they don't just have to be glass. And also really useful for storefronts, which is really the main reason I'm spending a bit of time on them with this project, because you've got the storefront most likely at the front, and then at the rear. So I think I showed you before, you can use the wall opening tool to make a hole in your wall. But I don't know, has anyone tried using that tool in the openings panel there? It's one of these tools, I really wonder why they keep it. So I'll show you what happens. If you use that opening, or the wall tool in the opening panel, you need to first just select a wall, and then you can draw an opening. So it's an easy way, quick easy way of making a hole in a wall. The problem with it is that it's very hard to set that accurately. You can set the height as accurately as you want to, but changing the sides is really fiddly. For some reason, it just won't snap to certain things and just isn't as good as the other option. So if you, it will work if you want to put a curtain wall in, but the other option is to just use Edit Profile, which is what I'd recommend. So, okay, so say for example you want to put a curtain wall into this wall at the back. Just isolate that. Okay, so what I'd highly recommend is, instead of using the opening tool, just use Edit Profile to make the hole in the wall. Because with this option you can control these dimensions a lot more easily. You can see there I'm just typing in those measurements that I want to make it 2 meters either end or something. Okay, so it's much easier to be accurate than with the opening tool for some reason. Okay, so then I can put a curtain wall into that opening, and that's a much better way of making the opening for the curtain wall. And curtain walls generally are a better way of making things like shop fronts than windows. So I see a lot of people struggling trying to put in all the properties and making their own window families from scratch just to do a shop front they're only going to do once, when it's much easier just to make an opening. And so if you're not sure what I mean, I'll just quickly show you. If I put a curtain wall into that now, here we'll just, that'll just have to come back. Okay, so if I put a curtain wall in, and I'll use the one that I've made. Which way am I drawing? Anti-clockwise, there we are. It's going to tell me they're overlapping. That doesn't matter because it's easy to adjust. So the base just needs to come up a bit. And I'll obviously fine-tune this later, but hopefully they'll give you the idea and maybe make it clear why it's such a useful technique. Okay, so can you see how much easier that is than trying to make a window with those properties? And people often go searching. I see people looking for fixed windows that have a certain number of panels and all the different options they want, when a curtain wall is usually going to give them everything much more easily, and you can fine tune it if you decide that you want to put in a grid pattern. You know, it's really easy now just to go and make that 1800 by, I don't know, 2100, and just put in that option and put in my Mullions. Oops, why didn't that go in there? Oh, it wasn't high enough. There we go. Okay, so that easy compared to doing it with a window where you'd have to go and make your own family from scratch and set up a lot of different properties. Right, so hopefully that'll give you some ideas. If you do need to use curtain systems, let me know and I'll go through that with you individually because they're a bit more complicated. But again, for storefronts like this or for interiors where you need some sort of glazed partition, curtain walls should be a really good option. And so, you know, the last system families we need to look at after that are railings and ramps, which I'll come back to afterwards, unless there's anything else you want me to look at with curtain walls.